thanks again, guys, or I guess I haven't said it yet, but thanks so much for coming to this talk. I know it's at, a 4 p.m. on a Friday after a week of going to a conference. And, many of our esteemed colleagues are either recovering from the festivities last night or on a plane home or both. So, thank you for making the time to come to my talk. I really appreciate it. And I'm here today to talk about Counterplay and Teamplay. So just real quick about myself. My name's Tom Cadwell. I'm the VP of Game Design at Riot Games. I've been doing design for a while. I guess my wife got into my PowerPoint there. So this talk's about, I think you can, sort of. I mean, if you just have to have, more stats, right? So that's not good counterplay, which I'll be getting to in a moment. So we're going to talk about a couple topics today. We're going to be going over, some game mechanics, theories in general, and then I'll tie those into counterplay and teamplay, and then wrap up with some closing thoughts and, of course, question and answer. I'd like to take as many questions as I can. So early in my career, one of my bosses at Blizzard said to me, game design is about creating satisfaction, mechanics are about satisfaction. And I think that this is a really powerful framework, and here's how I interpret it. I interpret satisfaction in a mechanic as a mechanic that has these three things. First, that the mechanic's fun to use. That means that it feels powerful to use. It feels responsive. It feels visceral. So when you look at Bayonetta or God of War, Diablo 3, it's really clear that those games deliver on this. You also expect a mechanical payoff, and what that means is, if I, as a player, do an action like shoot a fireball or send my chained blade weapon thing at someone, I should get a result that makes sense and seems consistent with what the designer sort of promised me. And lastly, it really feels good as a player if you feel like you earn that reward, if there's mastery to it, if there's nuance to the execution, if there's a way to be better. And when you put all this together, you get a very satisfying mechanic. And I think I can just test this real quick against a game we know is full of all sorts of really satisfying mechanics. And honestly, I think 80% of what you need to learn about game design you could learn just by carefully examining the original Mario Brothers, or really any of the Mario Brothers games. An example I'm going to use here is Fire Flower. And of course, Fire Flower is satisfying, but let's go through it. So first, fireballs, when you press them, they have a really responsive sound. They bounce along merrily. They look cool. It feels very responsive. It's just a fun ability. It does kill Goombas and Koopas and other double O letter Mario monsters. And it's not really the pinnacle of skill differentiation, but you can do jump shooting and bouncing over objects, and there's a bunch of different little techniques you use that can make your performance with this better and land so-called hard shots. So it is also mentally engaging. It's a good mechanic. So like I said, satisfaction is key to good game design, and I think we have this tendency to really focus on what the player is doing. The player. It's, I'm designing this mechanic. A player is going to use it. Are they going to be satisfied? The problem with this framework is that when you're in a multiplayer game, the actions of one player are really the context that other players respond to. My throwing a fireball is now a fireball that is hurting you and that you're going to try to respond to. And I think that we, as game designers, when we make multiplayer games, be they PvP or PvE or whatever, need to think holistically around, does this mechanic I've added create more gameplay by being there? Is it net positive for the game? And is it as net positive as it can be? How do I maximize satisfaction for all participants of the game? And the frameworks we use at Riot to describe these are Counterplay and Teamplay. And they're really the same thing. They're two sides of the same coin. And they're all based on this idea of maximizing satisfaction in the context of a shared multiplayer experience. So, sorry. I'm getting over a little bit of a cold. I promise I've been careful about handshaking. But anyway, so for a given ability, to assess if it has counterplay, I use a three-piece framework. So first, is a response possible, right? If that fireball's coming at you, can you do anything? Can you press a block button, right? Can you move out of the way? Is any response at all possible? Because if there's not, obviously there can't be counterplay. And a good example of something like this in League of Legends that doesn't have counterplay is Hex Tech, Shrapnel, Shells. Obviously, an ability never intended to be spoken aloud. And the way this ability works, so this is on a character called Corki, who's a ranged attacking character. He's very fragile, he hits very hard. And the basic format of this ability is every attack he makes gets a little bit of additional unavoidable damage on it. And as a player fighting Corki, this doesn't actually change how you play. There's no response you would make in response to this. For all intents and purposes, as the player on the other end, this is just like more damage Corki's doing to me. There's no gameplay there. So there's therefore like no counterplay. You can't respond. Additionally, in order to make a response, you need to understand that there's an opportunity to respond, that there's something you need to care about. So, if I was shooting a fireball at you and the fireball was invisible, you couldn't dodge it even if it was dodgeable. And, I think we've really strived on League of Legends to have clear visual effects and clear gameplay, but, this is a goal we haven't fully succeeded at. And let me give you an example. We had a recent tournament, the season 2 finals, and this was just a still frame from one of the games. And it's pretty tough to understand what the emergent threats are here, right? So on balance, I think we do an okay job at this, but I think we do a lot better because when we do this, it prevents counterplay from occurring because you don't know what to respond to. And lastly, just like any other game design exercise, you want to make your counterplay as interesting as possible, as nuanced, varied, skill differentiated, interesting. And an example of where we didn't do a great job of this in League of Legends was with the original version of EVELYNN'S Stealth. And EVELYNN'S this sneaky assassin character who's blue. So, okay, so the original version of Evelynn was, she'd go invisible, and if you got stealth detection, you could see her. So generally the way this gameplay would work would be if Evelynn thought she could kill you, she would go kill you and you wouldn't detect her. And then when you got frustrated with this, you'd buy stealth detection and not have that problem. And there's nothing interesting about that, right? Like, it's possible to counter it. It's clear that you need to counter it. It's clear how to counter it. But it's not interesting to counter it. So we replaced this. We took a page from the World of Warcraft Rogue stealth system and said, hey, let's make this new version of stealth where Evelynn can be detected by other players, not NPCs and such, except for towers, but other players, so that there's now counterplay. And I'll just walk through how this creates counterplay. So first, Evelynn actually has to find like an attack vector, knowing she's going to be detected. And players can also limit their risk by thinking about where Evelynn can't attack from. Secondly, opponents are rewarded for quick action. This is a theme that I think is really powerful in a real-time game, which is when you have responses that are much more powerful the sooner you enact them, such as getting out of the way of Evelynn running towards you, it adds a skill differentiation component around reaction time, which is something that's, you can always continuously get better at that. There's marginal skill improvements always possible. I think that's very powerful. So from our perspective, this new version of stealth has much better counterplay because we kept it clear and we kept it possible, but now it's actually somewhat interesting. So just to recap, to have counterplay, an ability needs to be possible, clear, and interesting. Well, the response. And just a quick footnote. In general, you're not going to be designing, counters, right? You're going to be designing other game mechanics for people to use. And that means that, things that are exhibiting that counterplay themselves will then be countered. And what you really want is, this sort of loop back and forth of, I know you're going to apply good counterplay, a good counter against me, so I'm going to change my move, knowing that I'm going to do that, and then I know that, you're right. So some of circular logic there, but it does make the game healthier. So an example of where we didn't do a great job of this was with Kassadin. He's this mage character who can teleport very often. His teleport leaps him a short distance and does a bunch of damage. And there's theoretically some bounding conditions on this, but realistically, this ability makes it so that when he uses this defensively, it tends to shut down a lot of follow-through plays. So this is not a bad ability. I just want to emphasize, just because something in your game doesn't have counterplay doesn't make it bad design, but it may be a missed opportunity, because having rich counterplay ultimately means your game is more satisfying. And cast it in is a missed opportunity, right? And maybe we'll revisit that at some point. It's not a bad ability, it's just not awesome, right? So I'm going to provide 3 concrete examples of counterplay, two from League of Legends and 1 from World of Warcraft. So first, sorry, is Morgana from League of Legends. She's a caster, kind of, has like dark, kind of shadowy powers. But before I talk about her, I'm going to talk about another League of Legends character with a similar ability, going through this spooky vision thing here. And it's Rune Prison. So the way Rune Prison works is it's another mage character. He picks a target. He casts the spell instantly. That target is immobilized in place for about 2 seconds. There's nothing wrong with this ability, but the gameplay is not great. You don't really earn it. You just cast it. And obviously, there's no counterplay, right? I mean, well, there's a little bit. The small amount of counterplay comes from the fact it has a long cooldown, and during that window, Ryze does have some relative vulnerability because he can't, turn around and paralyze you. But it doesn't have great counterplay, and honestly, it's a fun ability, but it's not a super fun ability because you don't really earn it, right? You just cast it and get it. So Morgana's kind of the same thing. It's also a root, but in the case of Morgana, it's a skill shot root. So right out of the gate, even before we have the mechanical interaction, this actually gives us anticipation, which is kind of like a secret spice of game design to kick it up a notch, right? Where players are like, geez, what's going to happen? I mean, XCOM, I think the new XCOM does really effectively with the kill cam. You're like, am I going to hit him? Am I going to hit him? And I think this is really a really powerful thing because it increases your emotional investment when the resolution happens. Right? So we're already doing better with dark binding just from this, the possibility of missing. Additionally, of course, there's a possibility of missing here. There's already counterplay here, and there's satisfaction wrapped into that counterplay of both, I'm going to earn hitting her and foiling her opportunity for counterplay, or I'm going to dodge on the other side and have exhibited good counterplay and feel that I made a good gameplay choice, which is satisfying, right? So, this missile. This paralyzation missile that Morgana shoots it's possible to respond. You can move out of the way. You can teleport over it, et cetera. It's very clear you need to respond, and it's interesting to respond. There's a lot of responses you can make, and that results in the interaction being satisfying. So there's Annie getting snared. And lastly, it does interact with enemy minions, which means that you get kind of nuanced counter positioning. Minions become like a terrain element in this engagement, and it also results in some pretty skillful plays. And I think those of you who play League of Legends are probably familiar with this. But I think that's a condition that adds value over just striking through everything and not having this. One quick comparison I would make, though, is comparing Rune Prison, the ability on the bottom, to Morgana's Dark Binding, I actually think from a pure play balance perspective that these abilities are the same power level. Like if I was dodgeball picking, how strong are abilities, these would come pretty close. But the actual stats on Morgana's Dark Binding, I mean, it's over double the range. It's almost double the duration, right? It's like, it feels like a stronger ability, but that's, because there's a possibility of missing, so it's fair. Additionally, like, there's agency on the receiving end. It's sort of deserved when you get hit. It's just, it's possible to kind of focus much more satisfaction into this. And, really what this comes down to is by having these kinds of restrictions, by having also good counterplay, you can often tune things in a direction that feel kind of maybe even a little bit OP, but actually are perfectly reasonable. And that's really powerful. Additionally, I would argue that from a game design perspective, we're putting the exact same amount of actual power in terms of the ability to influence a game outcome in either of these abilities. But Morgana's ability is more fun to use and more fun to play against than Ryze's ability. Both are more satisfying. So the way in which you take power and allocate it will determine how much satisfaction games create. And I think I'm going to go along that point a few more times with some other of my examples. Anticipation amplifies satisfaction, usually, unless you do it in a way that disempowers maybe some core pillar of satisfaction. And I just want to emphasize, satisfaction is not zero-sum. I think we have this notion that in games, if I'm winning and you're losing, you're not having fun and I'm having fun, right? If anything that I do has to take from you, there's like this pie that we divide up of how much fun we're going to have. But I think this is a great example of like, you can enlarge that pie with good game design, and you should. So example from WoW. So this is a Death Knight ability called Hungry and Cold, which had, is a fun ability. It's instant AoE daze. You just press a button. I think it's a daze, but it dazes an area of targets instantly for like, I think it's like 10 seconds or something. And daze is kind of like sleep in Warcraft 3. It's, until you take damage, you're stunned basically. And this doesn't have counterplay, right? This is pretty good gameplay. There's some timing elements to this. There's situations you use or not. But it doesn't have a lot of counterplay because it's instant. And once you're in it, you can't really do anything. So the Blizzard designers, I've always respected for being so committed to continuously improving their games. And unsurprisingly, Mists of Pandaria had a way cooler version of this that has really exceptional counterplay. So it's kind of, in some ways, the purpose of the skill is fairly similar. I mean, it's a little different. It's fairly similar. But basically what it does is it creates this whirling blizzard of coldness and badness around you, which is highly visible. So it's very clear that something's going on. And it gives you stacks of slow over time that eventually culminate in you being stunned for 6 seconds, which is a lot. Right? So it's very similar to this Morgana and Rise pattern, where in some ways, like Hungry and Cold is like Rune Prison, and Remorseless Winter is like Dark Binding, where it's just better all around, right? Because I can respond now, right? I can, by using this skill, my opponents can say, hey, I don't want to be. I notice I'm being slowed, and I know I've been through this ability before. I know what it's going to do. So I'm going to snare the Death Knight and run away. I'm going to stun the Death Knight. I'm going to teleport myself. I'm going to use it defensively. There's lots of things to be done. Also, like, as a Death Knight, there's things you can combo with this more directly now while you're using it to make the play, to make that goal of the 6-second stun, which is large. Again, satisfaction's not zero-sum. These, I would argue, are fairly similar in the broad spectrum of power, but one's a more fun ability holistically for the game. And there's an anticipatory component here. There's a drama around, like, I don't want to be CC'd that hard. It's going to hurt, versus, I would like to CC someone that long. It's going to be really rewarding when it happens. So I think this is a good example of how you can, with the same amount of power, slightly tweak some components of the ability and create something that's just much better. So moving back to League of Legends, we have a character called Garen. He's a swordsman, as you can see here, with his large two-handed sword. And in early versions of the game, he had this ability, Perseverance, an earlier version, where he would just all the time regenerate 1% of his total health every second. And this is not great. There's nothing to react to. And a concept I'd like to introduce here is this idea of a power budget, which is when players say that something is powerful, what they're really saying is that thing is much more powerful relative to some other set of things in the game, or perhaps all things in the game. So the corollary to this is, if I'm throwing out power willy-nilly on things that players don't value, I'm inherently sabotaging all the other actions they could be taking in terms of where I'm focusing that power to make the ability satisfying. And so this is an example of basically a brick of stats that sort of desatisfies the rest of the game in this like subtle, marginal way, but you have a lot of abilities like this that add up. So we revised it, and now what it does is combat damage turns it off. Same ability, higher values actually, but if you get hit, you don't get this for 12 seconds or 10 or wherever the play balance team has put it at this point. So this change creates, the ability to actually respond, right? Like, it's actually possible to have a response now. And because, dodging and hitting someone at range is generally interesting, it's interesting, right? And we also made it clear by having, the green, little healing dots under Garen when this is happening. And, by doing it this way, we spend our power budget to deliver gameplay. Rather than just making Garen kind of, like, resilient, we now made Garen have this interesting gameplay and counterplay of I want to try to sneak an attack on a minion for some gold and risk losing this buff, or I'm going to try to tag Garen to get this buff off of him. And lastly, one pattern I like here is that this creates a goal around a normal action and makes it something more, right? So, you want to hit Garen anyway. If you're in a lane fighting against Garen, you want to damage Garen because you want to kill Garen. But this actually creates a specific marginal victory case that feels satisfying to do, right? And sort of transforms a fairly routine action of, I'm going to hit Garen, into a significantly more significant action of, I've shut down most of his regeneration. And I think, actually thinking back to another game where this pattern is really powerful is World of Warcraft. World of Warcraft, one of the major innovations of vanilla World of Warcraft was the quest system, which essentially said, kill 10 kobolds in EverQuest for experience and loot, and now make it kill 10 kobolds because they've taken over the mines, and that's bad, and you want to save the mines. And now that's been transformed, Blizzard transformed, grind mobs into have an exciting quest that feels meaningful, right? That has like sort of narrative gameplay to it, as well as kind of a spiky reward that feels more satisfying. So by dressing some of these routine activities into goals, you occasionally have an opportunity to do a transformation like that that's positive for the game. So just one more example before I kind of transition into team play. It's CAITLYN. So CAITLYN is a sniper character in our game who shoots people. And her ultimate ability, predictably, is this really high-powered long-range headshot. So the way it works is she picks a target, and there's a channel time. And during that channel time, everyone knows, hey, this ability's been triggered. Lots of damage is going to happen to this person very soon. So they do have some marginal ability to exhibit counterplay here by raising shield, using a shielding ability or healing themselves or whatever. But the real counterplay to this is actually held by the teammates of CAITLYN's victim, because people can actually leap in front of the bullet and take one for the team, basically. So, Annie's this character on the right. She's about to get killed by CAITLYN. Garen can jump in here, take one for the team, because he's a big armored buff dude who doesn't care that much. And, everyone can feel very heroic. So, good design like this can create moments of heroism, right? Like you have this tension around is it going to kill this person? Is it not? Am I getting in the way or not? But additionally, while we were just talking about counterplay, this is actually team play in some sense, right? The counter wasn't held by your victim. It was the teamwork of your victim's team, the gameplay in response to that ability around that, that actually won the day. And I think that, some of my most satisfying moments in League of Legends have been, when somebody leaps in front of the bullet for me, or I leap in front of the bullet for them. I mean, it's a simple thing, but it feels really rewarding. And that's what team play is all about. So team play follows a very similar framework to counterplay. It's actually pretty much the same framework. So possible, right? Sorry. So you have to have a possibility of teamwork. So what that means is if I use an ability or I create a situation or whatever, will teamwork improve my team's performance after that? And an example of where we didn't do this great in League of Legends is on Twisted Fate. He's this, kind of gambler, card-themed power mage who has a passive ability that says everyone in the game will get, slightly more gold when they get a kill, right? And there's nothing wrong with this. I mean, there's a perfectly fine ability from some perspectives, but it is really power without gameplay because it's a team ability, but it doesn't actually create teamwork. And I think that's a really common mistake everyone as designers has made at some point probably, which is just because an ability enhances your team doesn't actually make it a good team ability, because if there's no teamwork generated, it's just a buff. It's just like the original version of Garen's passive, where you're just blowing the power budget of your game and not making the game more satisfying. So, this is an ability if we ever did a Twisted Fate remake, I think this is the sort of thing where we would look at. I'm not satisfied with this one. So, additionally, it's really important that if there is a team-oriented ability, that it's clear that there's an opportunity to respond, right? Battle's pretty hectic. It's important that, you can pretty much, notice what's going on and formulate your response. So Nunu is a character in League of Legends who has an ability called Blood Boil. He's this big Yeti dude. And all Blood Boil does is it increases your attack speed and your movement speed. So This is a perfectly fine ability, but because the particle effects are kind of subtle, it's a little bit tough to notice in the middle of a fight that this has happened to me, you know, as the beneficiary, and modify my behavior if it's appropriate. As opposed to maybe some of our more obvious shielding effects, which are, you know, reinforced in multiple places. Additionally, just like Counterplay, just because there's some gameplay that's occurring, if it's not rich gameplay, it's still not great gameplay. And you want the teamwork that's occurring to be varied, interesting, nuanced, you know, skill differentiated, you know, good game design, right? So, World of Warcraft did this really well was with Gorfien's Grasp. So this is a Death Knight ability where you target an ally, I believe, and it vacuums in enemies nearby. And there's a lot of uses for this. I mean, there's the selfish uses are the obvious ones of, you know, I vacuum mobs to me and I AoE them, or I vacuum mobs to me and I try to tank them or whatever. But the team facilitation that this can enable, the teamwork this can enable is much larger. I mean, you can line up AoEs, you can, you know, separate, you know, pools of mobs to, you know, allow some shared tanking. You can rescue people. There's a lot of different things you can do with this that then dovetail into a specific action by your teammates to leverage, you know, upon the situation, which is fundamentally teamwork, right? And, you know, here I searched on Google uses of Gorfien's Grasp, and, you know, you see this very, I mean, it's a little hard to see in the back, but, you know, you see like kind of users theory crafting, players theory crafting about all the different ways they can use this ability in a useful way, speaking from personal experience, which is a pretty good indication that your gameplay is interesting, right? If it's interesting enough to, you know, provide multiple examples of the cool moves you've done with it on the forum, people probably had a memorable experience, right? So, you know, just to recap, Teamplay occurs when teamwork is possible, when the occasion to respond is clear, and when the actual teamwork exhibited is, you know, varied, nuanced, interesting, et cetera. And just a quick note before I delve into some examples. I think that, you know, there are limited teamwork moments in games right now, and I mean, there are a number of really noteworthy ones, but I think anytime players feel they're exhibiting teamwork, where they're like, you know, they make an action and see a synchronized action from a teammate, and they get a good result, they're going to be the first thing they're going to do is credit their teamwork. They're going to say, because we're a great team, because we played together, we had, you know, a success. We had a great experience. And I think that whenever possible, if we can, you know, legitimize this view by players, we're going to have much happier, engaged players. I feel like, you know, when you look at like the World of Warcraft, you know, raid design, a lot of what those designers are doing is sculpting experiences for people to have awesome teamwork experience. They're basically creating a canvas for teamplay to emerge, right? So I'm going to give two examples, one from WoW and one from LoL. So first we have Thresh, who's a recent support champion, despite looking, you know, it was Achilles support. He's a support that supports you by killing people. He's got his ultra spooky lantern, and it's called Dark Passage. So he tosses his ultra spooky lantern a location, and an ally can click it and be teleported to him. So it's not this. And we did this on purpose. So we could have implemented this ability as, you know, hey, Thresh picks a target, and that target is moved Thresh, where we take all the agency out of their hands. But, you know, there would be no team play there, right? Additionally, there's some negative player behavior consequences of, gee, dude, I really didn't want to be grabbed there. I totally had it, right? You know, why did you move me out? So, you know, the most common use of this ability is I toss a lantern to my teammate who's being hurt, CAITLYN right there. And, you know, she right-clicks it, and, you know, we bro fist, right? So that's teamwork, right? Teamwork, you know, anytime teamwork, you know, happens, you feel really good. So again, like, there's no player behavior negatives here. Like, I can right-click or I cannot right-click. And when it happens, like, we get this, you know, magical, you know, teamwork moment. Let me give you an example video, and just this is a little bit hard to follow, but you'll see about 10 seconds in, you'll see a ranged character, Ashe. She's an archer, being escorted by Thresh as they work very closely as a team and leverage the team play available in this ability. And you can see in the bottom left there. Yeah. So that's what we aspire to create, right? I mean, those guys after that game were probably, I mean, that's a really memorable experience. That's probably more memorable than getting a pentakill or whatever, because the teamwork was so powerful there, right? And fundamentally, like much like we had the idea that if there's a failure condition on an ability, you can tune it to a stronger level. I also think that if an ability does require teamwork, which actually is, it's hard to be coordinated with two humans across the internet, we can make the rewards larger. This is an ability we would never make like at this power level as an ability you use on yourself. It's really strong, right? And again, like I said, I mean, when players exhibit teamwork and things go well, they attribute it to their teamwork and they feel really, really good about it. And I think that that's just such a really powerful emotional need that we can satisfy as designers. So another example of this is a much simpler example, but I think this is also a really excellent example of team play is Bloodlust. But before I go into Bloodlust, I'm going to talk about a much older WoW ability that mechanically is very similar, but unlike Bloodlust, doesn't have a lot of team play. So TRUESHOT Aura is, this has been around as long as I think WoW's even been in alpha. It's this aura that increases attack power. And I think it works now in the raid, but it's gone through a few iterations. But, this is a passive aura, right? It's sort of like Garen's wall of stats. There's not really a specific action you can do around this. It's good to have. I mean, it makes you hit harder and all this sort of thing. But there's actually not, gameplay there. And to some extent, it does implicitly reduce, the available power budget for other things that can be a WoW. On the other hand, with just a slight twist, you suddenly get something with lots of team play, right? Bloodlust mechanically is kind of the same thing, right? I mean, it's not because it's been transformed with team play, but it's a DPS boost, right? It's a 40-second DPS boost for 30%. I think it's maybe marginally weaker in a steady state than TRUESHOT, but I'm not sure. But they're pretty similar in overall power. But Bloodlust is an awesome ability. The way it works is, you cast the spell, and you hear this very signature, Warcraft Bloodlust sound, which, we all know. And you see the red swirlies, and you get increased attack and casting speed. So there's a clear call to action, and it's possible to exhibit teamwork, right? It's once per encounter use, and it's limited duration. So focusing your teamwork in that time, being coordinated, acting quickly, are all teamwork, right? So the typical use of this is let's burn down this mob, or let's get through the enrage phase, or let's focus down this emergent ad that's really troublesome. And the coordination around the use of the spell, I think, is even though it's so simple, is just really powerful. So typical use case is pop cooldowns, burn down the big mean raid boss, and pop your cooldowns, use your retargeting, et cetera. So again, like the way you grant power determines satisfaction. TRUESHOT Aura, power-wise, is very similar to Bloodlust, but doesn't grant a lot of satisfaction. Bloodlust grants a lot of satisfaction. Bloodlust is a great ability. Also, using this pattern of a short duration implicitly creates an opportunity for teamwork because there's a limited time. The better you communicate, the more fast you react, the better your response. And that went back to my comments on Evelyn about like if you add a time duration to make response sort of important, you kind of create a sliding scale of skill and gameplay. So those are my examples. Just to recap, Counterplay and Teamplay are two sides of the same coin. And in both cases, to have them, you need the response to be possible, clear, the need for response to be clear, and the responses to be interesting. Oh, I see I have a typo in my slides there. And fundamentally, in a multiplayer game, one player's actions affects everyone else's satisfaction. And we have to always be cognizant of that and weigh that holistically as designers. I was told I need a lolcat because it's a GDC talk. And thank you very much for attending my talk. I really appreciate it. And I'll take some questions. Also, please do fill out the surveys if you have a chance. Helps GDC make decisions about whether to fire me or invite me back and that sort of thing. So thanks again for attending, and I'll take questions now. Yes?
Hi. In 150 words or less, could you please tell me what you think is the worst designed ability in League of Legends and why?
Wow. I think an easy example would be the Hex Tech shrapnel example I gave. There's certainly others, and we're continuously striving to improve those. Every time we find one that we become certain is terrible or even suboptimal in some way or could be better, we want to prioritize it for fixing. And I think that's part of our commitment with the live game is to always raise that bar. Yes, on the left side.
Yeah, how do you create good design without creating something that feels homogeneous? So a lot of your examples were skill shots or things that they can react with time elements. How do you, create something that makes it feel different but still is good gameplay? Right.
So your question was, how do we, hold the design rules essentially while still creating, rich variety? This is going to sound a little bit of like maybe not the answer you're looking for, but I fundamentally think that the challenge there is to have great game designers and to also encourage them to try to break the rules once in a while and see if they can find a way to reconcile things. That's what we do. Thanks.
Thanks.
So I wanted to ask you about the, do you think there's a limit to team play and counterplay utility? Specifically, I wanted to ask you about Thresh, and then you actually brought it up. So do you think Thresh brings too much team play and counterplay utility to the table? So your question was, does Thresh bring too much utility and team play to the table? If not Thresh, is there a limit where you would say, okay, this is too much? Right. So I can answer that two ways. I think, sometimes you can have a play balance problem, right, where you have too much utility. Too much team play I don't think is possible, but maybe too much mechanical power is possible. So I think you should always maximize team play, but you might run into a play balance problem with certain configurations. Sorry, guys. The other thing I would say to that is just like, just blank. I had a thought in my head here. So Thresh. I think also like, as you develop characters, you're going to take risks to try to explore the things, and occasionally you do have to change some of the risks you made to resolve, and that's a risk we're prepared to take, as always. Thank you. So, yeah. Yes, on the left.
In the character select screen, there's a difficulty suggestion meter for different characters. How much does that desire to have characters of different difficulty play into the team play, the desire for team play?
Sure. So you asked me about the difficulty rating in our game, and we don't spend a lot of effort thinking about that, honestly. I mean, I think the main reason it's there is to sort of dissuade very new players from playing characters that they'll have a pretty poor first game experience with. So really, difficulty rating is not about difficulty to master. It's about, will your first game be fairly challenging relative to other characters' first game experiences? So as League of Legends has matured, though, to answer kind of your second question, we have been looking to create more skill differentiated, nuanced ability combinations, and we've been revising backwards to further enhance both some of the concepts I've been talking about and then just skillful execution in general. It's really important to us, and also, like, honestly, as your game matures, the expectations of your players evolve in certain directions. On the right?
Hi. I think the idea of the power budget is really interesting for each character. To what degree do you quantify that as a whole and compare between characters to make sure it's at the right level?
So the question was, how do we quantify power budget, and how do we do that comparison between characters? So generally, we don't really quantify it so much, but we do want to make sure that any characters is held up to a framework of, what are the pros and cons of this character versus other peer characters, and do those actually make sense in the game? Additionally, the power budget's often used as a concept to identify skills that are not contributing, right? Like, if you're going to make a skill strong, which skills should you make strong? If you're building Blitzcrank, do you make his auto attack speed up on his running ability strong, or do you make his grab strong? Well, you make his grab strong because that's the fun ability. So we often challenge designers of, why do you allocate so much power to this ability, which doesn't have as awesome gameplay as this other ability? Thanks.
Thanks.
My question is somewhat similar to the limit one, but it was more about the quantity of counterplay, in the sense that you could create a game that's overly reactionary, in that the first person to make a move gets punished. And do you think that's more a counterplay problem, or there's a different fundamental issue?
Yeah, so your question was, can you have too much counterplay? Can you have an overreactionary game in which action is punished? I think that's a different problem. Fundamentally, you need actions players take to be satisfying. And if you're in a situation where inaction is the optimal play, and you're inherently, kind of hatcheting the satisfaction of your game. Counterplay to exist has to, kind of work, right? It can't be, it can't be generally marginal for it to be, a solid execution of counterplay.
So in a sense, it has to be weaker than the play being made on the other person's account?
I'm sorry.
In a sense, the counterplay has to be weaker than the play being made.
I think that in some absolute sense that's true, but I think that there's lots of examples where that weakness might come from a subtle method. Like Flash is an example in League of Legends of it does counter a lot of stuff. It's also on a massive cooldown, right? So is it stronger than Dark Binding because it can reliably beat Dark Binding? Yes. Then again, Dark Binding has an 18-second cooldown. Flash has many minutes of cooldown. So on a broad mechanical perspective, it's not more powerful. And that kind of goes back to my comments about like power and satisfaction are correlated but fundamentally decoupled in our hands as designers to allocate effectively.
Thank you.
Yep.
So this is kind of related to some of the other questions, but my question is specifically, a lot of the examples you had were like taking a passive ability, making it an active ability because it's more satisfying if it's an active ability. But sort of one of the side effects of that is that increases the skill cap for the game. And for example, I'm not very good at this sort of game, so I prefer making characters that have more passive skills, even though they have less counterplay and team play potential. Is there sort of a concern that at a certain point the skill cap like for the professionals it's awesome, it's great to watch the videos, but is there a concern that at a certain point the skill cap becomes so high that the average player can't really have as enjoyable of an experience, even if you have like a perfect
right? So to just summarize your question, you're essentially asking, are we by making the game more skill differentiated, and having more active abilities or whatever, are we implicitly making it a game for a narrower group of people? I think that there's certainly a question of priorities, and we do want to make a competitive game. But I will also say that skill cap and skill floor are actually decoupled, and it's very possible to have an extremely high skill cap game that can be picked up and played. Matchmaking also plays into this because, so example, chess, right, low skill floor, extreme skill cap, right? Also, with matchmaking, with good matchmaking, at some level the difficulty of the game comes from your opponents, right? You're not managing to land skill shots, but your opponents aren't either, and they're not really trying to dodge your skill shots. And that's, I think modern matchmaking is just such a great thing for games for that reason. Thanks.
Hi, Tom. Thanks for a great talk and an extremely good game. I was wondering about the, how you make counterplay intuitive so that the player doesn't have to memorize all 100+ champs just to have counterplay against them. Are there some techniques that you guys use for that?
Sure. I think, so your question was how do we make counterplay intuitive? And I think there's two techniques. One technique is, thematic association and clarity, right? Like if a lightning bolt was to, I don't know, freeze you in place for 10 seconds, that would be a cognitive disconnect. On the other hand, if a big frosty, giant bolt's coming at you, there's a certain expectation. Also, though, honestly, like, when you have a game that people's mode of engagement tends to be, to repeatedly play it for some number of games, you can get away with a little bit more because, as long as there's a decent amount of clarity, people do learn. And in the case of League of Legends, like, as people start playing the game, they're not encountering 100 champions, right? They're encountering the current champions they can access. They're encountering the low IP cost champions, which generally are pretty clear on this sort of stuff. And from that perspective, we facilitate players, learning the game effectively. But it is a concern. I do think it is manageable, though.
Thank you.
Yes.
Is there any value or benefit from having less satisfying abilities in the game along with something like a Thresh Lantern, like a Sona Heal or something?
I'm sorry, a what or something?
Like a Sona Heal, where it's basically, it'll heal a nearby ally, but there's not that much that you're really doing. Is there some benefit or value of having that in a game rather than having something that feels more satisfying, or should everything feel very satisfying?
So the question is, should all your skills be satisfying, or can you have some of these less satisfying skills? I mean, obviously, you can have a mixture, but I think you should aspire to maximize as much as you can. And, but also, I mean, you are maximizing for different play styles of players. And, some people are just going to value, certain types of healing spells more than others, more than certain offensive spells. I mean, if your fantasy of play is, I want to play a powerful healer, I mean, you're fundamentally going to enjoy that more than an attack character. I do think that, we have run into this a lot, though, with heals where, they offer a lot of power but not a lot of satisfaction. And that's why, we've been kind of trending supports towards more offensive or shield focused, or when they do have heals, there's often a combined offensive component with them. So, I mean, I think, game design's trade-offs, right? And you're trying to provide a great experience for all the players that could enjoy your game, right? And in general, the way in which you maximize satisfaction is pretty consistent across those, but there are a number of exceptions where I think we have to, just be honest with ourselves and think about, to what extent variety is adding other value to the game. So, yes, on the left.
Hi, I really liked your points around satisfaction, but my question is around sort of how you determine what is satisfying to a player. I know there are different player archetypes that some people depend on, and otherwise you could perhaps depend on role. What's sort of your secret sauce when it comes to determining
yeah, so your question was how do you determine what's satisfying, what's the secret sauce related to it? I think there's a lot of forms of satisfaction that are not mechanical satisfaction. This talk was really about mechanical satisfaction, but if I'm playing Final Fantasy VII, a lot of the satisfaction in that game is more about narrative, completion, and this sort of thing. It's a very satisfying experience, though. And I think you have this expectation that events will unfold, et cetera. I think as you think about different game genres, there are other modes of satisfaction frequently used that are kind of highlighted in different ways through design. When it comes to the examples I'm using, those are very focused on sort of traditional mechanical satisfaction. And I guess I could potentially give a different talk about that concept. It's less fleshed out. But OK, other side.
Hi. So recently there was a kind of a move combo discovered called the Pull of Destiny, where Blitzcrank rocket grabs and Thresh uses his chain to pull Blitzcrank mid-grab and end up pulling the enemy halfway down a lane.
Right.
Is this kind of move, like, are you guys going to be removing this or kind of leaving it in to encourage high levels of team play? and these really powerful but hard to pull off maneuvers.
So the question was, Blitzcrank can do a combo hook, which can pull someone. By the way, how are we doing on time? Does one of the CAs know? 10 minutes? OK, great. So it's a combo pull that can pull across the map. And it feels a little kludgy. True. It also is pretty awesome. I think that ultimately depends. The live design teams will make that determination. I'm not going to make the determination for them up here. My intuition would be to say, though, that like it's not actually an overpowered or even very powerful ability. It's really cool and memorable. I don't really know why we wouldn't leave it in the game, because I think it's pretty fun to do too. So I would imagine we'll be keeping that unless there's some specific play balance reason why we would have to remove it.
Thank you.
Yeah. OK. On the left.
Hi. Once again, I'd like to thank you for talking. And my question is about, well, an issue we've been dancing about for a little while, the idea of burden of knowledge. And we've mentioned intuitivity of abilities. We've mentioned counterplay and how that sort of increases the density of information that players need to learn, makes that matter more. And especially as League of Legends is a game that has had the amount of information that players need to know increasing for years now. Is this a concern going forward, especially with dense counterplay increasing the amount of information that players need to know?
So your answer was, or your question was basically, does the complexity of League of Legends create an unsurmountable burden of knowledge over time? We certainly think about these issues, but there's also there are some common rules even within the really broad universe of League of Legends abilities of things we potentially try to signal or try to do, right? I mean, crowd control effects have a range of duration. Certain archetypes typically have a profile of function, and types of attacks are represented a certain way. And by having some of these common patterns, I think we really reduce kind of the maximum sort of player complexity load there. I also think, though, that it's really like when the worst examples of like bad burden of knowledge are like these like completely counterintuitive things. Like it's an attack that's damaging you where your incentive is to not move, or or it's like it looks like a heal, but it's actually going to kill you in 5 seconds. I mean, so we're there's really like all design is trade-offs, right? Every design decision you're ever going to make is a trade-off. You get something, you lose something, and burden of knowledge is a cost, right? It's a cost that we pay the second we have a game that has a game mechanic, and some mechanics make us pay a bigger cost, and some mechanics make us pay a smaller cost, and different mechanics deliver a different level of satisfaction, and other value to the game. So we just have to make those trade-offs, and I feel comfortable, with the pattern of trade-offs we've been making. On the right.
Thanks for the talk, Tom. I was wondering how much you consider when designing team play abilities the possibility to grief. Because you said with Thresh's Lamp that you wanted to avoid the Scorpion drag, for example. And it seems that you reduce the amount of skill needed for that ability compared to something, let's say, Pudge's Hook in Dota 2.
Right.
So you reduce the amount of heroism, but it makes it less possible to grief.
So So your question was, how do we think about griefing? And then you made the assertion that Pudge's Hook has more skill than Thresh's Lantern. I'm actually going to disagree with you on the second one. So griefing in general, if we can take an ability that's cool and we can modify it to not have griefing but still be cool, I don't see why we wouldn't do that. And in the case of Thresh's Lantern versus Pudge's Hook, it's true that landing Pudge is a character in Dota that has like a remote hook, and you drag somebody in, and that's a very cool ability. But there's no team play there, right? Like it's you feel like my friend made a good save if you get pulled out at the right time, but I actually think that the combined interactive experience of actually having to take action and time it correctly has an implicit cost to it. And just because the hardest case is harder to do doesn't mean that the total profile of all experiences around that skill are net, less, more or less skillful, right? And I think that I like that with Thresh's Lantern, you routinely see a variety of profiles of skillful plays, ranging from the garden variety, I dove a tower and got pulled out, to like the video you saw, which is clearly an example of extreme skill. And we've been really excited to see some of the moves coming out of LCS and pro level play with Thresh's Lantern. So like I just think like just like I said, like Morgana's Dark Binding is strictly better than Rune Prison, and I think most people would agree with that. I think that there's a lot of opportunities where you can remove the griefing and just make a better ability, and that's what we like to do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next question.
Hey, Tom. Thanks for the talk. I remember you talking about how you wanted to make team fights a bit more readable.
Yes.
What kind of ratio of visual cues to audio cues do you think make that most effective? Like, comes to balancing
Yeah,
the visual and audio?
so you're asking how do we make team fights more readable? What's the ratio of visual to audio? That's a really an it depends question. I can say that in general, you want effects to be on the screen as little time as is necessary to make them feel awesome and to deliver clarity of what's going on. I also think that you just need to make sure that all of your abilities correspond to their importance. I mean, really, this is a problem that's death by 1,000 cuts. So the solution is, solution by 1,000 stitches, right? So it's a long path, and it's a relative thing, and I think you can just use your judgment, going through your own game about, is this ability, how much of the visual space in someone's mind is this consuming, and is that relevant for what it is? I'll take one last question and then wrap up here.
Thanks.
Okay. Thanks.
Hi. I would like to hear your thoughts on counterplay and other genres. Specifically, I was thinking of first-person shooters. Call of Duty, something where players die really quickly, don't have much reaction time, to something more along the lines of Gears of War, where people die very slowly, and there's more opportunity to react.
So you wanted to ask about counterplay and other genres. I think most popular multiplayer PvP games do have significant counterplay, and it varies. I mean, but when going to the Counter-Strike example, I actually think that a lot of why you see no AWP servers and things like that is sort of a conscious decision of the players to say that's an ability, a sniper rifle that has limited counterplay. I'd rather it wasn't in the game because it's not fun to play against, overall. I think that a lot of the counterplay you see in Counter-Strike is about, hiding your footsteps, or how you go around a corner, or how you, sort of anticipate where people are going to be. It's the counterplay is in a lot of cases baked into movement and level design, and less into the gunplay. Because obviously, once you're engaging, it's pretty straightforward. I kill him or he kills me, right? And I think that's fine. I mean, counterplay doesn't have to, counterplay is a holistic appeal to making the game more satisfying. Not every ability, not every element has to have counterplay, but whenever you can leverage it to make the game better, you should. And I think actually Counter-Strike has pretty good counterplay because of the level and movement considerations. Okay, I'm going to wrap up. If anyone wants to talk to me, I'm up front. Thanks again for attending and coming to my late talk.